All right, so let's go ahead and jump on into it. Welcome everyone. Today we are going to do a deck tech on Tristan's 10,000 degree knife deck tech. If any of you got to see the deck list out of the MRC Open, hosted by Yeti by Luxera's map, you probably saw that one deck kind of stood out from a lot of the others. We saw a lot of Sylvie, and then we saw one Rai, we saw one Tony, and then we saw this random Water Tristan deck list pop up, and it is actually our teammate Tristan who actually piloted said deck. So we want to take some time, kind of go through his decisions, kind of why he played this deck list, and kind of what was the good matchups, what was the bad matchups, and kind of just go over how the deck performed, and if there's possibly any changes and things like that. So I'm going to kind of give the floor to Tristan for a second. Tristan, introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about this deck and what made you play this into the open.
So, I'm Tristan, or Glass on Discords. Part of the reason that I wanted to play this deck is because the irony of being named Tristan and playing Tristan. And a lot of the core of this deck was built from the list that Christian C or Duck Hats won US Nationals with, as well as Modest Meteor Easton got, I believe, top 16 with as well at US Nationals. So that's where the core of this deck came from, and a lot of the decision making was just, hey, I think that having the slight extra reach of a fourth Scepter trigger or lineage with Shadow Reaver, Shadow Dancer can be relevant in some matchups, as well as some of the new MRC cards. There's not many of them that are in the deck, but the few that are in there really, really, really help out this list to give it a slight extra edge.
Yeah, we're going to go into those cards because I think the MRC editions did really kind of add a lot to the Water Assassin package, especially with and as you said, having the fourth lineage can definitely really kind of make or break, because you have to now think about, well, am I going to take 12 from this, or am I going to possibly take 16 and Dagger Trigger am I even taking more? So it's kind of something over the course of the game you have to kind of think about. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in to first. Let's just kind of look at the material deck. So looking at the material deck, everything kind of seems pretty standard to what we would see in a lot of the lists. We obviously see the Poison Dagger. I did notice in this list, we actually do not have the Grail. What was your kind of decision to not play the Grail and actually play the Grand Crusader's Ring?
So in the water deck, you just need more draw, and you have a bit of control. So you can, relatively protect your Poison Dagger, but the Grail is actually in the sideboard, mostly for very specific matchups, though. But general use, drawing a card is pretty good, especially when playing an Allies deck.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then, of course, we see the Tristan lineage here. Of course, we're seeing level 1 Tristan. We're seeing, of course, the 2 level 3s that we assume. I did notice, especially because when we were playtesting, I got to see it kind of firsthand why you made the decision. But tell everybody a little bit of kind of why you chose to go with the original Tristan versus maybe the draw card Tristan that most people would expect from the new lineage.
So one of the main reasons is you never really generate enough prep counters to make going to Tristan Hired Blade actually worth it. The only ways to really generate prep counters in the deck are Tristan Underhanded, and then there's 2 cards in the main deck that generate prep. So you're not really ever drawing a card off of Underhanded, so it's not worth it. So we play Grimstalker instead for a couple of reasons. So number one is sometimes it just gives you more prep for thieving cuts sometimes. Or if you have a Korhazi Trapper in play, you get a prep counter every turn for your Korhazi Trapper. If for some reason you make it a Shadow Dancer, you've generated a little bit of prep for redirect. And then one of the big things right now is actually Sylvie using Covenant of Thorns, where Grimstalker can, if they threaten the Covenant of Thorns something like Illustrious Slime or a Blue Slime, it's really hard for this deck to deal with it, and Grimstalker just kills it. So you don't really have to worry about those as much.
Okay, yeah, and that's what we kind of came into that when we were playtesting as Sylvie into this matchup. Is one of the first times I resolved the Covenant of Thorns on the Blue Slime. It was kind of the situation of, oh no, I'm in trouble, kind of situation. And it was that point, it was either you would have to use the triggers on Scepter Lumia to probably try to kill me, or kill the Blue Slime, which you don't really want to lose that damage there. And then, of course, we kind of came to that decision, or you came to the decision of, hey, let's just throw Grimstalker in there and let's just deal with it in one hit.
Mm-hmm.
Just get it out of the way. And I assume that's also with the Sword of Seeking. You just want to have that extra hit potential. You want to be able to have that 2-target hit
so,
rather than
Seeking
just
both allows you
having
to
a dagger.
target. It allows you to just have a material deck way to swing with Dancer. Once again, if you somehow make it there, or sometimes you just get it early so you can throw in 1 more damage with the Poison Dagger if you have time.
Yeah, and then I assume because the same point, without not being able to make the prep counters, there's not really a reason to play the new prep dagger over the Sword of Seeking.
No, and another thing with the Sword of Seeking is Sword of Seeking is pretty ubiquitous. That card has 2 durability. It can swing twice, and that's a huge deal when compared to Mercenary's Blade, which only swings once.
Yeah, and of course, Fiza or Fire Xander gets access to having 2 daggers, so at this point, you're kind of putting that 2 into 1 kind of approach.
Yep.
A lot of people, for most people who play Grand Archive, probably don't need an explanation of why Scepter Lumia's in here. But for people who may be new, kind of seeing this deck, getting into Grand Archive for the first time, tell us a little bit about this card and why this makes Water Tristan so stupidly powerful.
So Scepter of Lumina is essentially, I'm going to sit on my Spirit of Water for a little bit, and I'll put my Scepter in play. And then essentially it's if my opponent answers my Scepter, I'll draw 2 cards. If my opponent doesn't answer the Scepter, it's now threatening just insane burst damage where I just level up Dungeon Guide, and that on its own is 8 damage plus the swing from Dungeon Guide, so it's 9. So it takes water from just this controlling, slow grind to, hey, I have this really, really important permanent that if you don't answer it, it's going to burst you down.
Yeah, and in firsthand, just being able to see that Scepter, especially even playing if you're on fire, it's you have to use it. You've got to answer it. Wind, it's even harder because wind, it's like we can Zephyr it, but then it's we usually just eat 1 trigger and then we have to do it again turn after. So, and again, as you said, if it's trying to be answered, in worst case scenario, it's 5 cards down, you draw a card. And with looking at how the deck is actually built and looking at Tristan's level 1 with agility 3 and some other ways to get agility as well that we'll talk about in the main deck, it is not hard for you to have 5 cards in hand just to say, cool, I'm going to draw 2.
Yeah.
And then at that point, even playing in any water deck, when they get a hand advantage in an ally version like this, it's very, very hard to come back.
I mean, that's another part of the reason why Shadow Reaver in this deck is so good, because if you're playing an Allies Mirror, where you're essentially playing the same just 2/3s or small interactive pieces, Shadow Reaver stealing 4 cards from your opponent is effectively drawing 4 cards. And then if he levels up into Dancer, you actually draw 2 cards, which in an Allies Mirror, drawing 6 is backbreaking.
Yeah, and we're seeing that in even just like the Wind Automatons. Like they're kind of foregoing some of that control for just ways to pop power cells to draw cards. So we're kind of learning very quickly that the ally list, being able to draw, was incredibly effective. And of course, I think that's what makes Sylvie work right now.
Yeah.
Is Sylvie is just every ally they play, it's replacing itself. It's replacing itself. It's replacing itself. So it's very hard to kind of keep up pressure against a deck like that. And I think that this deck is kind of counteracting that pretty well. So let's go ahead and, of course, with the rest of the Regalia, pretty standard. Poison Dagger, if anybody is new to this card, it essentially just allows the deck to add 1 extra damage to every source, so it adds up very, very quickly. Other card games have had problems with cards like this, so that's actually something why we've always kind of thought about this could potentially be a problem in the future. I know Flesh and Blood has had this issue with Lightning. We've seen
Ball
Magic.
Lightning, Stubby Hammers.
Yeah. We've seen Magic have this issue of just being able to attack on 1 extra damage to every hit. Can be backbreaking to a lot of situations like Lords, things like that. So it's a card that essentially says everything for 1 turn is a Lord, in a sense. So it's very, very hard to deal with.
Yeah, and like with Scepter, it's like, you level up a Scepter, throw your dagger, that's 6 damage, but Dagger provides so much reach very quickly that sometimes you just don't need the Scepter. You just go to Tristan 1, throw the dagger, and your opponent dies.
Yeah, I mean, just having, for this case scenario, you have 3 2/3s out in play. Your opponent's not answer them. Dagger alone with those is going to be, what, 10 damage?
Yeah, 10 damage. Coming
in. And it's very, very, very hard to come back from something like that. One other card I do want to call out in terms of this, because I think it's actually kind of a nifty way to look at this, is I did notice you are playing the Life Essence Amulet over the backup charger. after the tournament, are you thinking of maybe making that swap, or are you still happy on Life
I'm
Essence
still
over
very
playing the
happy with
backup?
Life Essence. Because worst case scenario, it says my opponent's gonna ignore my allies because they don't want me to draw the card. Best case scenario, you draw a card because some random ally died. And other notable things about Backup Treasure is, this deck obviously likes to hold up 3 cards to play interaction, which makes Backup Treasure pretty good. However, this deck is pretty reliant on controlling its hand size, as our one of our main threats in the deck is Gildas, and Backup Charger pushes you above Gildas's balance threshold. So just that slight point loss of playing Life Essence Amulet over keeping consistency with Gildas is more preferable to me.
Awesome. And yeah, and of course with Amulet, I know of course nullifying an Amulet, those are kind of at this point, most of these decks have at least 2 or 3 situational regalia to use.
Yeah.
After this tournament, do you think those regalia are going to stay the same there, or are you thinking about maybe putting something else in for future tournaments?
If Fiza and Sylvie continue to be top decks in the format, I definitely think that both of those cards are not changing at all. Safeguard Amulet provides a little bit against Sylvie, but your main goal against Sylvie is to just try and kill her before she can get set up. But the Safeguard Amulet against Fiza, their burst turns are a mix of attack and spell damage, and just being able to blank the spell damage because none of their spells go above that 4 threshold is very, very relevant. And then the Lantern, also very good into Fiza, stops them from materializing the Verican Stole Knife for free, and it also stops them from doubling a Rending Flames.
Yeah, and that's one thing is like I think most of my losses to Fiza were because they saw 2 Rending Flames, and I just didn't have Lantern in play.
And then another big part is Sylvie's not super heavy on playing King Slime, but you don't want him entering play. And Lantern says
for sure.
The King cannot enter play, so that's very nice.
Yeah, being able to essentially remove the chance of doubling up the Storm Slime activation from the King Slime is incredibly powerful. Because there's a lot of games that we saw even in the open where the game kind of came down to, I have a Storm Slime, I'm gonna push you with pretty much lethal, and then I essentially will say I'm gonna put you in a state where you're gonna lose regardless, where it's gonna be I'm gonna play the King Slime, banish that Storm Slime and 2 others. I don't really care what the other 2 are, and now you're in a situation of I'm gonna keep swinging at you for 4 and I'm gonna kill you that way, or you can answer the Storm Slime, or you can answer this King Slime and just have Storm Slime kill you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those situations where it was, if you're in an ally matchup, King Slime's just gonna sit there and stare at you in the face.
Storm Slime is quite the horrifying card, because on average, Sylvies are going, all right, cool, I'm going to banish 5 slimes leveling up, 1, 2, and then Dungeon Guide, and then they'll play it on their first Slime Sovereign turn, so they shoot you for 5, and then they have a 5/3 that if you answer, they draw cards and buffs their next Storm Slime. So now it's like, they just tend you for free, and now they have a 5/3 in play, and it's
yeah,
hard.
Not to mention post Stone Scale Band into the actual Gaia's Blessing. That's going to be 9-10 damage there. Plus, if they're banishing one more of their floating memory slimes, it's easily going to be 10 or 11. Yeah. So during the tournament, we saw Storm Slimes land for 13, 15 damage points in that game. So it's definitely something you have to be aware of. And nullifying, and I think Safeguard is the best choice going into a lot of that. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that's the Regalia deck. It's very much kind of, we can tell, locked in place, especially with this meta. But let's go ahead and take a look at the main deck. A lot of people who've maybe played allies before in the past may recognize a lot of this, but there are kind of some key differences in this type of list when using those. So let's go ahead and kind of start from the top and kind of talk about the main ally suite. What you kept the same and what did you want to change kind of going into playing a deck like this?
So if you were to just straight up look at Duck Hat's deck, the main changes that I made are, there's an additional copy of Esteem Knight, there is 1 less Korhazi Trapper, and there are now 2 copies of Sadie Blood Harvester. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same as what he was playing. The ally suite varies from, I'm playing 2/3s, this is a Hateful Ally, and this is a Burst Ally. So the 2 burst allies are the Dungeon Guides and Gildas. Dungeon Guide itself, not burst damage, but combined with Scepter and Poison Dagger, very much is burst damage. And this deck plays, if you ever played Magic, it plays very much like is it Delver style decks? Gildas Chronicler of Asa is Delver. You just play
Yeah, very much so.
you play a 3-drop, you swing her for 4, and you hold up interaction. That's kind of the bread and butter main focus of the deck.
Yeah, and being able to use things like the amulet and then being able to use the ring to be able to reset your hand size back to 7 as well in a lot of matchups. Like when I watch you do this, just being able to say, cool, swing with Gildas, protect Gildas for the turn, go back up to that 7-card hand, drop another 3-drop, swing with Gildas again, and even if you only did that like 2 or 3 times, that's still 8 to 12 damage. That in a game where you've been taking that in the first couple of turns of the game, if I'm even like Sylvie level 2, I already have possibly 12 to 8 damage on me. I'm already kind of sweating a little bit at that point.
Yeah.
And I have to then think, okay, is the Lantern kill possible even if I go level 3?
Yep. And then another one of the big ones is the Esteem Knight Train Sharpshooter split. Both of those cards in this deck are 3-cost 2/3s, no additional text, but the reason that the original split was made for that card is around the card Dream Fairy, which puts the allies into your memory and you can't play them anymore, which is super, super, super relevant. So we just kind of... So he had the idea of essentially splitting the difference of, it doesn't matter which one you play, but it gives you a slight equity into Dream Fairy if you just split them.
Yeah. And sometimes that's just the most relevant play as well. And of course, Lurking, not really much have to describe about that. It's probably, besides in this deck, Nia, Lurking is probably one of your best openers in the game.
The 3, if you are going first, the best openers that you can play are Lurking Assailant, Sadie, and Lunette. Sometimes Squirrelhazy Trapper, just because it can protect itself, but those are the big ones because Lurking Assailant has that stealth if it's not rested, and if you're going first, your opponent's not attacking, so it's very awake. Lunette, because she's the 1/4 that makes all your opponent's allies enter rested, and Sadie, because it's not worth trying to kill a Sadie, because I can just pick her up, and she's not dead.
And it's man, Sadie, the more and more like we talk about this card and the more and more we kind of like see it in play, it's a card that you have to kind of look at your opponent and be like, I still have to swing at Sadie because I don't want her to stay on the board.
Yeah.
Because I don't want her to just sit there, and so your turn, you're gonna go 2 allies. You're gonna go 3 allies. So you're gonna start playing more and more allies. So I want Sadie off the board, but there's no way for me to actually kill it per se without having to put a lot of resources, which I've seen Sadies get killed by swinging into it, you act, and then of course you go to activate the ability, and then they hit it with something like maybe a spark or something like that. But then at that point, you just got 2 cards out of their hand for 1.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're winning the ally matchup.
And one of the main things I'm actually looking at in this deck is I've thought about cutting. So there's 3 Esteem Knights right now. I've thought about removing one of them and putting in a 3rd copy of Sadie, just because it doesn't really matter if you have multiple Sadies, because you can just pick her up. Another thing that I will see a lot of right now, with like especially early into meta, is people are very overzealous in protecting their Sadies. Sometimes you just let her die. Like, your opponent spent resources trying to kill her, and she did her job. Like, maybe one turn they attack into her, you pick her up and save her, and then next turn she's in play, and you're like, I don't really need the Sadie anymore. She's already done enough, so I'll just let her die. And instead hold up my more important interaction pieces.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you have this like really nice kind of balancing act with this card, which is I think really cool. And that's actually the follow-up question I was going to ask, is because I know with you running 2 Sadies, a lot of times whenever you're playing an ally deck like this and you want to see at least the card once, usually that rule of thumb is to go 3.
Yeah.
So, and you kind of answered that question. I was going to follow up with, is possibly cutting a card and what card that would be to increase to the 3rd Sadie. Some other kind of questions, or some other things I kind of want to actually point out with the deck, is also the 2 Chilling Touches. Tell me a little bit about that. What was your decision to kind of play Chilling Touch over maybe another situational piece, like another Freezing Hail or another kind of Song of Frost or some other interaction?
So Chilling Touch just, especially early on in the game, it just taxes people a little bit, so they can't do as much on subsequent turns. And that can be really, really backbreaking. Or if you get into a long game where they've spent a lot of their influence leveling up, you just Chilling Touch them, and now they're 1 card less, and they just can't do anything because they have less cards and their influence is super low, so you just essentially gain a turn on them. And one of the most backbreaking things you can do to someone is if they go 2 cards down on like turn 1 and you go Nia into Chilling Touch, they can't level up anymore, and you've just thrown off their entire game.
Yeah. And that's the other thing you point out with the Nia. The fact that is course for me, I always forget that you can even do this. But with Nia, it does not necessarily say it has to be a main deck card you can name. It can be champions. It can be Regalia. And that can be incredibly... I mean, we had a game where you named Covenant of Thorns, and I had to really think about playing the Covenant of Thorns because I'm already at a low influence count. I'm already playing at like 3-4 influence, and I really want to resolve that Storm Slime or that King Slime next turn. So it's kind of this weird act now of, do I lose a card just to get protection on the board?
Other things I've named with Nia that have been really effective is I've named Grand Crusader's Ring. You don't really want to materialize GCR when it costs a card. Sometimes in mirrors. I played one mirror yesterday, or I played one relative mirror against a Water Xander allies, and I named his Poison Dagger with my Nia, and she just kind of stuck in play, and he ignored her and never really had the ability to put his Poison Dagger in play.
Yeah, I mean, it's a card just has a lot of flexibility, and I think it's more and more like decks like this, especially with water getting more and more popular. The best way to put it. This set definitely unlocked a lot of kind of missing pieces water needed, and I think we're going to see a lot more of these type of these kind of plays coming out of this. And I'm happy to see water is kind of getting into its own of how you see like wind is a lot of the bouncing potential, fire is a lot of the burst damage potential, and then of course we're seeing here with water is a lot more of this very control heavy, being able to kind of...
It's control heavy, and you also you need to realize when you need to use your pieces to attack your opponent, or when you need to use your, like control pieces to offensively stifle or slow down your opponent.
Yeah. One other card I do want to, I guess there's two more final cards I do want to kind of talk about pretty quickly in here. First is with the Snow Fairy. We've seen a lot of, like, even with Dream Fairies getting cut down to 2 or 3 ofs. In decks, we see a lot of, even other water decks are more control focused down to, like, 3 Snow Fairies. Are you happy with the 4 count, or are you thinking of possibly changing that again?
The only thing that sucks is if you draw an opening hand, and your opening hand is, like, Nia, Snow Fairy, and, like, a Dungeon Guide, and you're like, oh, I don't have any allies I want to play on turn 1. However, just being able to Snow Fairy things is so important. You can get through Lustrous Slimes and just ignore them, or you can lock down key allies in mirrors or in other decks, and just instead of having to send your allies there, you just play your Snow Fairy. And yeah, she's a 1/2, so she's a lot weaker. However, it locks something down and allows you to send your damage more at face. So in the long term, it's more valuable than just another 2/3.
Yeah, and I completely agree, because there's a lot of games where even just like putting something that you wouldn't think is relevant, like in the Wind ally matchup, being able to throw down the Snow Fairy and be able to lock out something like even an Interceptor is incredibly powerful, just because I have no way to now answer some of this aggression that comes into me. Gildas is generally going to guarantee it's 4, so it becomes a lot harder. The last card I do want to also talk about, we've seen a lot more of True Sight coming into play. I know we've had rants about this in our Discord team chat regarding why this is so important. But talk a little about the Stillwater Patrol. Why are we running a 4-drop in this deck just for the True Sight?
You need to kill fairies. Fairies are scary. Killing Dream Fairies and opposing Snow Fairies is super relevant. With the rise of Shimmercloak Assassin, especially with the ability for Andronico or Mercurial Heart to buff the Shimmercloak Assassin to just a stealth 3/3, having a Stillwater Patrol that says, I'm going to attack this stealth ally for 3 is huge. Because then it essentially takes away their free reign. I'm going to clear one of your allies every turn, and you're saying, no, I'm going to actually answer that. And then also, it's a pretty good response if you're in like some allies mirror and your opponent goes turn 1 Lurking Assailant. Playing a Stillwater is a really, really, really good response, because you just clear their lurking, and now they've done nothing.
And because you're in an 8-card hand, you've essentially, that extra card is paying what you would be.
Yeah, you're paying what you would, and you're still holding up 3 cards to play interaction.
And it's sometimes you just have to think about it too, because it's playing the lurking and then or playing the Shimmercloak thinking it's safe. and then your opponent just goes, cool, Stillwater Patrol, kill it, and you're just like, all right, cool. All the tempo I just had, you now have. And at this point in the ally mirrors, we've talked about it. We've talked with others who've done the math on it, and a lot of those matchups come down to if you control tempo, generally you're going to control the game.
Yep.
And this is just a card that, just much like how you see decks running these win decks running the Hawk a lot more now for the True Sight. Honestly, I think Stillwater paying the extra 1 versus the 3, I think is more relevant because you do most of the stealth units. You are going to hit for 3.
Yeah,
now Shimmer Cloak.
Another one seeing more play right now is Rose, especially considering with the rides of automatons, her being an automaton to be buffed by, once again, Mercurial Heart, Andronica, and being a 2/3 herself, that also sometimes has fast speed activation, is really, really relevant having True Sight on her.
Oh, yeah. So, that's, of course, the main deck, and, of course, it makes a lot of sense. We touched on, of course, the dungeon guides. They're not, this is, most decks you see that are running dungeon guides, they want to push level 3 in this, but as Tristan said, in this deck, it is a lot more. It's essentially a burst card.
This is the deck where you play dungeon guide to level 1 and you're happy.
Yeah, this is, and we've had a game where you opened the game and I had to do the math and I was like, you know what? I think I'm okay here. I won't materialize or I won't deal with the scepter right now because I think the only way I lose if you have double dungeon guide. It means you'd have to go level 1 and level 2 off dungeon guide. So yeah, I'll get greedy and I'll take that off. And then you went to your turn and go, dungeon guide, take 4. And I'm like, yeah, I take 4. You go, dungeon guide, take 4 more. And I'm like, yep, I'm dead. Cool.
Yep.
Good game.
And
I appreciate it.
A couple other relevant things is we were playing Vicious Slice over Drown Cut now. And that's just a personal choice that I have. Drown Cut is a 1-cost swing for 2, and it has floating memory if you're an assassin. So obviously the deck lowers its floating count, but floating is not super relevant in this deck. The total like cost of memory in the Regalia deck is like 10, and the only other reason we care about float is for Frostborn Paladin. So it's not super relevant to have the float, and Vicious Slice says, I'm going to attack humans for 1 more damage if you're an assassin, and fun fact, all level 1 champions and beyond are humans. So you just kind of get a free extra damage on them. It clears Gildas, it clears any 2/3, and then another relevant thing is Freezing Hail with Tristan Underhand is super good. Because if you go into like a dagger scepter turn and you throw the dagger and you go, cool, I'm gonna put these 3 cards down, and one of them, and you put 3 cards down and you play some stuff out, and then you play like an attack on your turn, then you go to your end step and you pick up the cards and you throw the Freezing Hail for another 3 damage at the end of your turn.
Yeah, I mean, that can be a shutout on games too, just being able to do that. It's the same way why we see the Fire Xander splitting its damage between that physical and non-physical, because sometimes you're gonna get blocked in that physical damage attack. Most people aren't expecting these decks to do some sort of non-physical damage as well. So it's definitely a nice play. So let's kind of go into the final part of this, and that is going to be sideboard. Now let's make a note before we go into this to anybody who might be newer to card games. Sideboards are not necessarily a you must do this. They are not always a we always have to go with these specific cards. It really comes down to what you're seeing in your locals. So if you're not seeing a lot of allies, you may not play this week. If you're not seeing a lot of water, you may not play this. So just kind of keep that in mind as we kind of go through this, that it is going to be for more of our local meta / what we see in a big, broad tournament setting. But this is, of course, flexible, and we may talk about some options that you can use to kind of change that out. So let's go ahead and kind of jump into the sideboard, because a lot of this is your decision going into the event. A lot of it's going to be kind of why you wanted to do this. So I'll kind of let you take the floor and kind of go through each card and tell me a little bit why you played it and was it relevant going into this event.
So I'll start with the Quicksilver Grail. Quicksilver Grail is because I have perpetual and infinite respect for Erupting, because if you don't respect that deck, it will blow you up. And asking Erupting to now answer a second Regalia to get through the Nullifying Lantern, or force, or essentially burn off like a Fire Momentum or a Rhapsody itself to get through the Grail is super, super important, because it reduces the amount of burst and slows their gameplay down by a little bit. it also has some relevance into other matchups where you expect to see a lot of Regalia hate, or you're not expecting the game to go long enough for you to really get your GCR going. So you can just swap them out and instead put another one of your Regalia under the Grail just to protect it a little. I have put, oftentimes you can put Safeguard Amulet or Terrafrings under Quicksilver Grail just to protect a Terrafring to make sure that it's not, Zephyred or Fracturized or whatever on an end step. Terrafring itself is very much is really good for slowing down in allies mirrors, or once again, if you're against a low influence opponent, sometimes it's worth it to just pop a Terrafring, and then they have to choose between, hey, I can attack with the ally that I have right now to try and maintain board pressure, or I can expand my board presence, but it'll probably just die anyway because it's not swinging. Viridian Protective Trinket is, if you're going to see water, you should, and your deck cares about what your opponent's interaction is, you should be playing this card. Because it just makes them, instead of holding up 3 for a lot of their interaction spells, such as Song of Frost, Frostbind, Fracturize, and the occasional Freezing Hail, it forces them to hold up 5, which is a much, much, much higher ask. You'll see the 4th Lunette in the sideboard. There are 3 in the main board. You just bring her in the ally mirrors, because, and especially against Fire Xander, turn 1 Lunette against Fire Xander, it slows down their aggression so quickly and makes it so that they have to answer the Lunette before they can really get their game plan going. And that's a deck where buying 1 to 2 turns is just that's everything. That's the whole game right there. The additional Stillwater Patrols, if you're playing against heavy stealth focused decks, Stillwater Patrol is good to come in. But if you're not playing in stealth, it's very easy to cut her for other pieces too, which is why we only have 2 main board, 2 sideboard. And then the last piece is the Storm of Thorns. Storm of Thorns is incredibly strong. Again, once into Fire Xander, you reduce all of their points of damage by 1, essentially negating their Poison Dagger. So they go into their turn expecting a Poison Dagger to have enough reach to kill you. And not only does it negate 1 damage, but if that attack is only coming in for 1, it negates the full attack. So, example against the Korhazi Courier, you would be taking 1 from the Poison Dagger, and then 1 from the Ping, and then 1 more from the Poison Dagger, and instead of taking 4, you're taking 0 there. As well as in ally mirrors, you just go, they swing in to try and clear your board, and you just go Storm of Thorns, and now all your allies take either no damage or half damage, and the whole scenario of board control is just completely in your favor as you've just bought yourself an entire turn.
Yeah, the more that this card gets played, especially into metas where we see a lot of allies, there's a lot of situations where Storm of Thorns could just say Time Walk on the card. It could just say take an extra turn after this one. Because there are times where it's, especially with Faiza doesn't want to swing anything now. Because there's times where I've seen people actually take the initial dagger hit just to give them the thought that I'm going to get this through. And then they'll swing with a 1-1 or a 1-4. And you'll go Storm of Thorns, and they lose that ally, and their entire turn is now bricked.
Yeah, especially if they go like dagger, and then during their recollection they throw like a small spell at you, putting their whole hand down. You just go, okay, I'm gonna Storm of Thorns, and I'm gonna lock out the rest of this turn.
Yeah, I think, and even in the float, because I know people are like, what about you don't get the float memory? I don't think of it.
You do not care.
You do not care. If you're a Guardian,
is so strong.
If you're a Guardian, cool, you get the extra bonus, which we'll see things like, of course, if anybody's watched the deck tech that Terry did on his Water Toner's Control, he talks about it as well. This card is stupid powerful. It is one of the cards that I think makes Water so playable. Because I think, in a lot of situations, I think this card does more protection than Resolute Stand does. That being said, Resolute blocks 3 from every instance, but this says your entire board. So when you're playing any type of ally focus, this card just gets so much better. And turning in things, like if I have a 1-3, usually I would, so if I have a 1-3 and you have two allies out, you can swing 2 allies into that and kill it. Whenever you play Storm of Thorns, you need at least 3 now. with 3/2/3s to kill. And in this meta, whereas some people are actually foregoing that 2/3 stat line for more of like control pieces, it becomes even harder to deal with them.
Yeah, and another huge piece of it is if you have a 2/3 that's awake, and you play Stormthorns and they attack into it with like, I don't know, a 2/3, you retaliate and you just clear their ally and it only takes one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of it's, and the fact that it's fast activation means you always have to think about it. It's something you always have to worry about as the player going into this. And I think that's also something I want to kind of touch on with Viridian, is I think a lot of people going into this event, with us having to worry so much about Faiza, we worried so much about Slimes, we worried so much about all these other decks, that I think Water just fell off of our radar, because there was multiple people, and even including myself, I didn't have Viridian. And there was times where I'm like, if I would have just had Viridian in this list, I would have had a much, much easier time into some of these
Another
matchups.
relevant thing is all water interaction, or most of the water interaction, Song of Frost, Frostbind, Freezing Hail, Fracturize, they're all slowed down by Viridian. Stormthorns, you can just play it in response to the Viridian materialization, and you still get your Stormthorns. It still costs 2, and it just spent a turn materializing essentially nothing for you to take an extra one.
Yeah, and then at that point, you just get a hard reset where you're just like, all right, cool, I gotta think about this now, so I'm probably gonna play a 5-card hand going to each one. And that's also something talking about the reason why we like Sadie so much. There's a lot of times where Sadie can just kill an ally, they can play this turn, they essentially negate their entire turn. You attack Sadie into something of theirs, and you get agility 3, and sometimes that agility 3 is paying that extra Viridian cost.
Yep.
All right, well, I think that's at least the main part of the deck. Now, kind of want to close it out with a little bit of, after playing this into this event, possibly going forward, playing if you play this again, is there any key changes that you're thinking about making, or things that you would probably suggest making to maybe a more, maybe some different metas that people might be playing in?
So, I am looking into, I'm playing 3 Stormthorns because I really, really wanted to see them, but I don't ever think that 3 need to come in. So I want to try and find some other sideboard card, maybe like a extra copy of something in the main board, or maybe even find spots for it. Other cards I'm looking at are Incapacitate, where I had someone ask me why I was playing Frostbind over Incapacitate, as I am an assassin, so it costs 2. And one of the actually main reasons to play Frostbind right now over Incapacitate is because Frostbind hits Dungeon Guides, and also allies and ally mirrors. But the relevant thing about Dungeon Guide is if you're playing against a Sylvie and they have they go into their turn and they play a Dungeon Guide and they have 2 cards in their hand, they still pay for a Frostbind, and they're trying to Dungeon Guide to level 3, you can still just Frostbind that Dungeon Guide anyway, knowing that they'll pay, and force them to knowing that if they pay, they put their cards down and they can no longer make use of Slime Sovereign's on enter effect, and essentially buy yourself more time in that matchup where that's everything that you need.
Yeah, and it's kind of a lose-lose situation for the Sylvie, because you have to now make the decision of, do I lose the on-enter activation just to be able to start playing my essentially my turn going into the next one? And a lot of times I think that's where a lot of Sylvie players are also making a mistake, where I think at that point is,
you let the Dungeon Guide get countered.
You get the Let's In on a counter because you have the 3 cards down. You'll lose all 3 of those cards. That's fine. But whenever you play this card into that and they say, "Cool, put 2 down," you've essentially just won that match.
Yeah, because I've lost to opponents going to Sylvie and then they go immediately Storm Slime me and I just die. Vampiric Slime, 4/4 Vampiric Slime is quite hard to deal with. I've seen Ethereal Slimes. That it's a huge stealth body with True Sight that just clears things and draws cards. Just like numerous cards that you can name in that deck are completely backbreaking if it gets those 2 buff counters.
Yeah. And that's the big thing about, I think, and I agree with you. The Frostbind, I think, is still really relevant. I think getting some cyber slots is definitely better. One thing also people got to remember, and I think that's with looking at the counter for it, is Triss will say the Assassin counter card. Even if you pay it for 4, it is still good. But of course, this deck, a lot of times we'll get to play it for 2. But you also have to look at is you don't get to hit allies.
Yep.
With this card.
You also don't
get to answer those. Yeah. And sometimes, and right now, even we're seeing even with as people get And it's weird because we made this comment earlier about the main regalia is people are not respecting erupting right now. So we're seeing people put like they're starting to move lanterns like into sideboard, or they're like not playing lantern at all. And a lot of people are things like, well, that's erupting is gonna have a field day. And we're actually learning that water, especially like water tonerist, is having even more scarier turns because they're doing Icebound Slam. And they're saying, hey,
Yeah.
take 8.
Yeah,
off this
like
card.
the water decks now are taking advantage of the fact that people aren't really playing it, and so they're just getting free equity with Icebound Slam and Tideholder Claymore, a card that I personally don't think is very good. But they're just getting free equity from it because people are cutting Lantern, and it's just something that I really refuse to do because that card it does so much for so little investment.
Yeah, and that's what I wish I would have mainboarded it going into the tournament as well, because I played one of my only losses. Because the other was draws. The only loss I had was against a Water Diana, only went level 2, but I learned very quickly how powerful the Ranger Water unique
Dahlia.
is. Yeah, Dahlia was like I was sitting there, I was like, I'm at a safe threat level. I've got like he has to do 18 to me to kill me, and then he just picks up his graveyard and starts counting, and I go, oh, this is bad, isn't it? Then he goes, okay, 13, we're good. And then he goes, Dahlia, distant, attack you. And I go, yeah, I take a 16, I'm dead. I'm dead to your board, the other 2 attacks on your board. I think it's something that as well, you just have to really respect. And I think it's, again, another reason where I think, as cool as the card is, I don't think you have to overcommit it into the deck. I think the Frostbind is the call.
Yeah, and I definitely do want to try and find space for like 1, maybe 2, perhaps even 3 incapacitates in this deck, which might become that, 3rd Storm of Thorn slot will become at 1 incapacitate. But then it becomes a lot harder. I did notice that the few eruptings that were there, some of them had actually been cutting the Dusklight and the Dusklight combo with Astra cards to blow up a Fracturized Lantern, and we're instead running just reduced Ash because it's a fast speed destroy spell, and they're just playing that in response to like a Fracturizing of a Lantern instead. So now there's like the heads up play of Fracturizing a Lantern early just so that you can get around a reduce to Ash. Incapacitate also counters reduce. And various other things. It unconditionally counters erupting, especially in a deck that has a lot of influence to be able to pay through a Frostbind. So definitely looking. That's the primary card I'm looking at to try and find space for, and then obviously the Sadie and a Steam Knight swap. I will probably be trying that out very soon.
Yeah, I definitely want to see how that goes because I think we talked about this before in this set. I think Sadie is the set's Ghost of Pendragon. I think that card is just out of the set. I think that might be one of the most insane cards. Like everything about the text box.
It's probably the best SR in this set. Another card that I was looking at was now obviously the deck has an incredibly low floating memory count, being 6, but Lost in Thought. If you see like 2 float, 1 to 2 float, and you play a Lost in Thought, and you banish 2, and you just draw more cards, and then you play another Lost in Thought, and you just cycle through your deck, that could be really, really strong in an Allies matchup, but it's so hard to find this potential space for something like that, I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, and looking back on this, I think the other one I think was, because like I didn't catch it the first time, but I know you said you had a low count on getting prep counters. With the play of Thieving Cut, are you thinking about keeping Thieving Cut just for the 3 attack stat line, or are you thinking about possibly swapping that?
Oh yeah, the guaranteed 3 attack stat line is super, super important. And just the deck is like, I'm going to draw cards when I want to with Thieving Cut because of Underhanded Grimstalker, but I don't need to all the time.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, I think that kind of wraps up everything in the deck tech. I hope you guys did enjoy. We'll probably be doing more of these as well. There's a lot of other decks we actually kind of want to talk about. We kind of want to go into, especially as we start going more into the MRC season. Going into July, we're going to see a lot more Store Championships. We're going to see regionals kick off at the very end of this month as well, as we're going to see 2 regionals that are already on the docket. So we'll probably see a lot more. We're going to talk about these decks a lot more as well. We're also going to be kind of doing our own in-house team brewing, and then as we kind of figure out lists that we are enjoying or we're playing and stuff, we'll probably make videos on that as well. So if you guys like these, feel free to give us a like. Make sure you follow, and we'll get more of these videos as well. Tristan, do you have any final closing thoughts before we end the video today?
I just want to thank Andy and everyone behind like both Luxera's map and the Serene Balance team for just all the work they do in the community, hosting online events, making sure events are casted, working with other casters, trying to just the community would not be as large, nor would it be where it is without any of those people.
Yeah, and same from me as well. It's the online events have been run so well. The prizing has been so good for everyone.
Insane considering these events are free entry.
Free entry, like, also, let's just a shout out in general to the Grand Archive community. After playing so many card games for so long, this community is so welcoming. This event as well, I saw people who have never played a bigger Grand Archive event. They've maybe played a local. There's a few people who haven't even played like locals as well. This is like their first event going into like an open tournament with 108 people in it. So I'm just so happy to see the community growing. Everybody is very welcoming in this community as well. And I think with this set as well, these recollection decks they came out with, both are incredibly powerful, with the Sylvie obviously being a little bit up here compared to the rest.
Yeah,
but
like
I'll say
having the Sylvie deck basically be a super close to just a competitive deck as a starting point for people is so big. And the Tristan recollection, like, it's not on the power level of the Sylvie deck up front, but it is a very good starting point, and there's such welcoming entries into the game which will definitely help it grow more. And I cannot wait to see more recollections down the line.
Yeah, hopefully we're gonna. At this point, we're just waiting for that Mordred recollection. We're gonna see that pop up, or maybe that Polhawk
or Alan
recollection,
just anyone,
or the Alan. Yeah, Tamer. I think Tamer finally has his time, so I think it's time we or let. Oh, but your comment. But let's hopefully Arasana gets that treatment here down the road too. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. We'll have more of these in the future, and make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you give us a like. And until next time, later, everyone.